Hello and welcome. The fate of a young Asian girl hangs in the balance in Saudi Arabia as a delegation from her homeland pleads for her life. Risana Nafik was offered work on a passport which lied about her age. At 17, she found herself caring for a baby who choked to death in her arms. Although she confessed to murder, Risana claims it was under duress. She was condemned to death and her fate now hinges on an appeal or a pardon from the parents of the deceased baby. But Risana Nafik's case is only one of thousands across the world, where workers, often from impoverished Asian countries, seek employment in the hope of supporting their families back home. There's little protection from labour laws, leaving them at the mercy of their employers, and the tales of abuse and harsh conditions are numerous. On today's show, we look at the plight of domestic workers in the Middle East and find out what, if anything, is being done to protect them. Don't forget, we take your questions via phone and mobile phone text. The numbers are at the bottom of your screen. Joining the show from Beirut is Kanwal Tariq Hamid, one of the leading activists for domestic workers in the Middle East. And here in Washington, D.C., we're joined by Melanie Orhant, the managing attorney for the Break the Chain campaign, an organization seeking to minimize the effects of worker exploitation through research, outreach and advocacy and training as well. Glad to have you both with us. And Kanwal Tariq Hamid, if I could start with you there in Beirut first, and start by asking you about this particular case. I guess we should point out, in all fairness, it's not just specific to Saudi Arabia. This is something that happens around the Middle East and around the world, in fact, isn't it?
The abuse of migrant workers, yes, it is something that's rampant in the Middle East and the Gulf states, but it's something that occurs worldwide. I mean, there are specifics to the system within or under which they are treated in the Gulf and Middle Eastern states that I believe, and many other activists I'm sure will agree, contribute or even create, conditions of abuse. But it is a global problem.
What are the particular problems you see there, say for example in the Middle East region?
Well, I think the first problem is the sponsorship system, and there's the kafala system specifically under which domestic workers are given employment. I mean, if you look at the kafala system, the conditions and terms that it allows people to work under are very similar to the conditions of slavery. People are treated as powerless. People are treated as property, actually. They are powerless. They're alienated from the people with whom they work, and their freedom of movement and access to anything outside the home in which they work is at the behest of their employers. And I mean, these are conditions that existed, when slavery was practiced, but that was abolished 200 years ago. Yet we still have, slave-like conditions being practiced under the kafala system in Gulf states and in the Middle East.
Well, of course, Melanie Orhant, it's good to have you here as well. I mean, I want to find out from you what Break the Chain campaign does, but it is a problem that even Western developed nations, the USA, for example, faces.
Yes, our organization primarily works with domestic workers in the Washington, D.C. who find themselves in situations of trafficking and labor exploitation. We have many instances of individuals who are trafficked by employees of of embassies, of employees of UN, international aid agencies, for example, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. We also have your regular Joe who's able to bring over domestic workers under certain other types of diplomat programs.
What do they come and complain to you about? What is it specifically they're usually concerned with?
If they're trafficking cases, there are many cases that your other guest spoke of. For example, forced labor, working 15, 20 hours a day, not being able to leave the premises, having their passports taken away. Extreme cases involving physical abuse, serious physical abuse. We've had instances where people have been thrown down the stairs, cases involving rape, serious sexual abuse. We've had instances of cases of forced abortions. Many of our clients are forced to sleep in basements with no mattresses. Those are the extremes. We've also had cases where people were not paid sufficiently, are not allowed to go to church, temple, mosque, are never allowed to call home. And those are sort of some of the lesser egregious cases.
Of course, the case of Risana Nafik is a particularly serious one because here she had a death sentence hanging over her head as well. And I know that the Sri Lankan government's been making a lot of appeals. Let's get on the phone with us Deputy Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka, Mr. Hussein Bahil, who's calling us from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. Sir, just update us on the case of Risana Nafik.
Yes, the case of Risana Nafik, as we are aware, she has been sentenced to death in the case of infanticide, and she has been charged with murder. Of course, the fact remains that she was underage when she came over to Saudi Arabia. She was only 17. when this incident took place. She was employed as a housemaid, but also was given charge of looking after an infant, which she was not experienced in. While not wanting to comment on the legalistic aspects of the case, which is sub judice, because we have submitted an appeal into the higher courts in Saudi Arabia, we, as a second strategy, what we have done is, as per the laws of Saudi Arabia, the parents of the infant who died have the authority to pardon Risana, and we are now making an all-out concerted effort to see, to exert whatever influence anybody could use on the parents to pardon Risana Nafik.
How optimistic are you of some sort of resolution, Minister?
I am very, very optimistic. I have the utmost faith in the humanitarian aspect of the people of Saudi Arabia. And there have been many cases, I am told, where even at the last minute pardons have been granted.
Minister, I thank you very much for joining us there and updating us on the case of Risana Nafik there from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. Let's go back to Beirut and Kanwal Tariq Hamid and ask you a little bit about the kind of recourse that domestic workers in the Middle East region have if they have something they want to complain about. Are there any opportunities at all for them to find some sort of recourse?
Well, when you asked Melanie whether what kind of cases she takes, I immediately thought that if even the case is the woman concerned, or in some few cases the man concerned, is able to bring their case outside of the home or outside the situation in which they're either being abused or not being granted their rights. For domestic workers, specifically in the Gulf and Middle East states, under the kafala system, we've spoken about how little access they have to anywhere outside of their sponsor's home. And I'll give you a shocking example. We had a case of a woman who was subjected to physical abuse and rape by her sponsor. When she escaped his home and turned to the police authorities who are allegedly supposed to help her, she was given the option of staying in jail until or during the course of the court proceedings. Now, this is a system which treats clearly the victims as the criminals, because under the kafala system, if you're not living with the person who sponsors you to be in the country, then you have to live in jail because you're in the country as an illegal or a runaway worker. And this is how the many illegal and runaway workers are created, which governments complain about, the influx of free visa or illegal workers. Many of the free visa and illegal workers are created by a system which produces abuses and violations as such.
Let's get a call in from Mohammed, who's on the line from Austria. Mohammed, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, I want to ask this is a known fact, these third world country people treat so badly in the Middle East. Why is it taking so long for any kind of action against these governments? And my question is that why didn't we take this issue in the United Nations? Thanks, Riz. And my 2-year-old son said, call Riz and Papa. Ciao.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Let me get Melanie's view on this now. Laws, in terms of what exists in terms of international laws, human rights, civil rights, what is there that would protect people in theory?
There's actually a UN protocol called the Palermo Convention that addresses this issue from an international perspective. And many countries, including the United States, have signed on to this protocol. I have to be honest, I'm not sure what countries in the Middle East have signed on to this, but it actually requires states to protect individuals who are victims of trafficking and would require them not to, for example, put people in jail if they are testifying against their traffickers, and allow them certain special privileges to be able to work with law enforcement in the prosecution of traffickers. So it would be behooving that countries in the Middle East and other countries who have not signed on to the Palermo Convention to sign on to it and to draft legislation that protects victims of crimes, and these trafficked individuals and these people who have been in situations of labor exploitation are victims of trafficking and victims of crimes, not criminals themselves.
I put to you an email question, actually, Melanie, which came from California in the US, and Honey in California says, governments which allow such treatment should be held responsible for their actions and the actions of their citizens. Instead of high rises, they should begin to build high moral human standards. Now, I guess you've touched on this to some degree, but no one can be forced. No government can really be forced, I guess, unless they've signed on. And even then, some kind of action against them is still difficult, I guess.
That's true. No government can be forced to do anything that they don't want to do. However, there is international understanding that slavery is wrong, and this is a modern day form of slavery. And so we can, as a people, as a society, as a culture, as a human being, view slavery, and this is slavery, for example, keeping people, forcing them to work, not paying them, keeping them in horrendous situations, taking their passports away, physical abuse, psychological abuse, terrorizing individuals to keep you in a home working day after day after day, is a fundamental violation of international human rights and international human law. So these people should, countries should take this seriously. And I think many countries, not just in the Middle East, are not taking this seriously.
Right. That's why I say it is a worldwide issue. Now, Kanwal Tariq Hamid, if I can get an email to you that came from Colombo in Sri Lanka, Amin Izzadeen wrote in saying, why has no Muslim scholar urged Arab employers to treat their maids kindly in keeping with Islamic teachings? Is it because the housemaids are lesser humans? Isn't this some kind of Arab apartheid?
I don't know why any Muslim scholar hasn't urged, Arabs or Muslims alike to treat, their employees with respect. But quite frankly, I don't think it's an issue that's to do with religion, although it would be useful. I mean, following up on what Melanie was saying about the responsibility of governments where these workers are living, I think it's also the responsibility of the governments of the sending countries to stop just thinking about remittances and the money coming back into their countries, and to take some action and put themselves on the ground level where their workers are and get involved with the troubles and the problems that the workers have, because quite often there's a problem of language, and the key personnel involved, which could be involved here and could be very useful and helpful to these workers, is their own embassy representatives who've consistently failed to do anything concrete for them. And then also, like Melanie said, civil society.
Although in this case of Risana Nafik, of course, we've seen the Sri Lankan delegation, including the Deputy Foreign Minister, they go across to try and represent her. Now, I wonder, though, when it comes down to it, in terms of the Middle East, certainly, there's a pattern, isn't there? It's mostly women domestic help being abused by women masters.
We do have many cases of that. We have cases also of women domestic workers being abused by the children of their employer, physically and verbally. We have them being sent to multiple households to work there. We have them being abused physically, verbally, and sexually by their male employer. I mean, the grounds on which the abuse is carried out is pretty wide.
Have you seen? Have you seen any signs of improvement? Any kind of move to try to change the situation on the ground there?
I mean, I will say that from working in Bahrain, I was a journalist and I covered a lot of stories. There's been a concerted effort to raise awareness on this issue. I mean, there's a lot of public pressure and has been put on the government, and a lot of appeals have been made to the relevant bodies. But the effects that it's had, sadly, I can't say that they've been consistent enough to remedy the problem. And I think, quite frankly, that's because the problem is with the system rather than treating the victims of the system, that we need to place some emphasis on correcting an inherently flawed system.
And there is also the problem, isn't there, Melanie, that there is the economic concern that Kanwal had mentioned earlier, in that so much money goes back to relatives and so on, that these people are often stuck. They have the choice of either, leaving and then suddenly their income is cut off completely and they don't have any other prospects, or continuing in a very difficult situation but managing to support families back home. I
think with the individuals who are in situations of trafficking or serious labor exploitation, I don't think that they're sending a lot of money home, because many of them are maybe, if they're lucky, are earning maybe $200 a month, which in some countries can be a lot of money. I'm not saying that it's not. I think it's all of the people who are not being exploited who are sending a lot of money. So I think many countries don't want to rock the boat on those individuals. So I think you need to sort of look at that whole system, and I agree about that. However, I still think that you need to sort of look at the situation and acknowledge that individuals are being abused in this situation, and that's not acceptable, period, under any circumstance.
How much success have you had in finding resolution in many of these cases?
If individuals want to come forward and do something, we normally can assist them. In the United States, luckily, in cases of trafficking, we can actually assist them in getting an immigration benefit if they're willing to testify and work against their traffickers. In cases of labor exploitation, we can assist them on the civil side in trying to get financial restitution. We cannot help them with any kind of immigration benefit normally. So if they're willing to do something, we can normally assist them. If they don't want to do anything, we normally can't assist them.
But they have the immigration issue here in somewhere like the US.
Yes, we can. We can assist them with that if they're a trafficking case. So.
Kanwal, if I can get back to you with an email that came in from Amman in Jordan. And we had Nader Idkedek say, slavery did not end. These cases should be looked into thoroughly. I can send you thousands of stories from my neighborhood alone. And the countries from these which workers originate should be forbidden from sending them. But I guess there's no that's not practical actually stopping any kind of workers going and finding some kind of employment, because in terms of percentage there must be many workers who do benefit from this kind of opportunity.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, nobody's saying that they shouldn't be sent or be allowed to travel out of their countries to work, because, you know, that's essential. You can't deny somebody the right to their own survival or the survival of their family. But the thing is, for domestic workers, specifically in the Gulf and the Middle East, what they do is not even recognized as work, because it doesn't come under the labor law, because the domain in which they work is a house. So the labor law does not extend to the household, and therefore they can't practice any rights as workers, and quite frankly their work is not recognized as work.
Well, Kanwal, Tariq Hamid and Melanie Hornt, I want to thank you very much for being with us and answering this and covering the case also of Risana Nafik. Thank you both.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us. For continued coverage of this issue, including an interview with the parents of Risana Nafik, please tune into the next edition of 101 East here on Al Jazeera. On tomorrow's Rizkan Show, we talk with Ed Hussein, who's talking about his experience with Islamic extremism in his book, The Islamist. If you have any thoughts or if you have any questions, do send an email to riz@aljazeera.net. And we'll see you next time. Street Talk's coming up next.